Hi, and welcome to this, let's call it a bonus session that we've added for Emergence 2021, where we're basically going to provide some insights into how companies are utilizing sort of influencers and social media to accelerate their growth. And to basically go to understand this space a little bit more, we've got the chairman of Crowd Media Holdings, which is stock code ASX CM8. Welcome, Stephen Schapera, to the session.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you and nice to be here.
So let's just kick off. Just give us a little background about Crowd Media. You're obviously a listed company. If you can help us a bit of an understanding as far as what you do and how you work sort of in this space, that would be great.
So Crowd Media has been around for quite some time. It started out with a focus on SMS text messaging and subscription services relating to essentially your mobile phone. So downloading screensavers, playing games on your phone, that type of thing. And over time, it has gradually, strengthened its expertise in the area of Q&A, questions and answers. So it started out as a game. People would would ask a question from their phone and they would get an answer. Today, that's what we call AI Q&A, artificial intelligence Q&A. And we've answered something like 180 million questions in the last 10 years. So we've got a lot of data. Today, Crowd Media is called it repositioned for the future in that space. But now we don't do anything on a telephone, or we're doing it mainly on let's call it on the web or in the cloud. And so we've adapted for that. So we still have a subscription service. We still do Q&A, but everything that we do now is about media tech and positioning ourselves for the influencer marketing future.
And what have you seen as far as what are the, I suppose, trends in influencer marketing, and especially the rise of it?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't hear that question.
Yes. I was going to say, what have you seen? What have you observed as far as the trends and the rise of influencer marketing over the last few years?
Wow. Okay. So we were one of the first. In my previous life, I was in the cosmetic business, and in the cosmetic business, we were one of the first ones to sort of pioneer this space. And we began, coincidentally, on July the 4th, 2015. So almost 6 years ago, we began working what was to become the term influencer didn't exist. So we began working with somebody who was then called a blogger or a vlogger. And we kind of pioneered the space. We were probably one of the 3 cosmetic brands that started out working with this type of person. And it was new to the space because prior to that, if you went back 20 years, influencers always exist, but the influencer 20 years ago was someone like Isabella Rossellini or Roger Moore or somebody like that. Today, the influencer is somebody from reality TV or anyone with a large Instagram following. So we've seen from the start, which was in about 2015, I would say, to today, where you have influencers who have more followings than the population of many countries. Kim Kardashian,
which is absolutely insane, right? And you see some of the monies that some of these celebrities are making for their posts. I find it astonishing.
Yeah, there are. I mean, everyone wants their son or daughter to be a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or something silly. Quite frankly, if I was asked what I want, I'd say have a huge following on Instagram if you want to make money. It's not unusual to have to pay $300,000, $400,000 for 1 or 2 posts. Not unusual incredible. At all. If you want a big
now, obviously, that kind of budget is out of the sort of realms of a startup or an early stage company looking to tackle typically a sort of B2C market. But how can founders utilize this as a platform? Like, where do they get access to these influencers?
So I think it's working in founders' favors to some extent because 2-3 years ago, an influencer who had, let's just say, a following of 10,000 or 20,000 on Instagram was not really on the radar. They were referred to as micro influencers, and they weren't really on the radar. Today, it's quite different because now it's all about engagement, sharing, likes, and so on and so forth. And what you will often find is that it can be better to target 10 influencers who each have 20,000 followers rather than one influencer who has 200,000 followers. So I think that's the first thing, is to say, don't take your eye off the ball when it comes to the smaller influencers. In terms of how to get to them, it's always difficult because they've all got agents now, and that is a real challenge. So I always go back to the old school, which is business is about relationships. So the best way is for a brand to try and foster a relationship directly with the influencer, and deal, either if not deal with them direct, at least have the influencer refer them to the agent rather than just going to an agent blind.
That makes sense. And is it only, like, my observation is it's obviously well targeted for B2C companies, but have you seen sort of any good use cases for B2B companies?
I think, like anything in business, you have to be imaginative. So as I said in the previous question, an influencer can range from somebody like Isabella Rossellini, Roger Moore, Muhammad Ali, somebody tremendously famous as a celebrity. But an influencer can also be a school teacher. So if I think back to my own life, I was influenced by university lecturers. I was influenced by school teachers. My first calculator at university, way back in 1980 or 81, was a thing called a Hewlett-Packard HP 41CV. I still have it. Why did I buy the Hewlett-Packard? That's what our professor told us to get. So don't ignore the opportunities for influencers in the corporate space, B2B. Easy. Go onto LinkedIn, find people who are doing a lot of posts on LinkedIn. They're an influencer. Somebody who speaks at a conference, that's an influencer. If you have somebody talking about, let's say, I don't know, drug delivery technology at a medical conference, that person is an influencer. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be Kim Kardashian. Quite the opposite.
I like it. And what would you see as some of the, like, obviously the trends when it comes to social platforms are always changing. You mentioned Instagram before. Obviously, we've seen over the years, you've got Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok. Now Clubhouse is going ballistic. What are some of the trends that you're observing? What's on the rise? What's on the decline, etc.?
So the first thing is to differentiate between a trend and what I would call a movement. So the move from one platform to another, those are probably cycles rather than trends. But what's happening is technology is leapfrogging over legacy technology. So if you think to the origins of influencer marketing, it was probably driven by YouTube. Okay, and where is YouTube today? It's certainly not nearly as significant as Instagram. Amongst young people or younger people, TikTok is now an incredibly powerful platform. What I think is interesting, and I am not sure yet if it's a trend or a movement, I suspect it's a trend, but it's the emergence of Clubhouse. And Clubhouse is interesting because whereas before everything was very rich visually, Clubhouse, there's no visual component to Clubhouse. It's a digital platform. It's purely audio. What we find at Crowd Media to be so interesting about Clubhouse is that with Clubhouse, you can not only listen in, but you can raise a hand and hopefully ask a question. And that's particularly interesting to Crowd Media because Crowd Media, the future of Crowd Media, is all about leveraging our Q&A technology. And my wife. I was talking to my wife a few days ago, and we were driving along in the car, and she comes from a family where everybody wanted her to be a doctor or a lawyer or something professional like that. And she said she was always thinking, but how can I earn money while I'm sleeping? And this is where the Q&A technology comes in, because if you can imagine with something like Clubhouse, where there's a discussion going on and somebody can raise their hand and ask a question, that question doesn't need to be answered by that person. It could be answered by an artificial intelligence. And that's that's the part that we find absolutely fascinating. So if you're listening into a conversation between Lewis Hamilton and his manager on Clubhouse, there's no reason why you couldn't ask a question and have that question answered by our Crowd's AI platform.
Interesting. So your vision of the future is an automated AI Q&A process where brands can automatically answer questions coming from their networks or their followers.
Absolutely. We are all about creating a digital twin meaning a visual twin and an audio twin, or both connected. So literally the ability to have a discussion with Lewis Hamilton about Formula One, because you might be a Formula One fan, or a discussion about football with Sir Alex Ferguson, or a discussion about history or some historic event with Napoleon or Gustav Eiffel. Absolutely. That's what we're all about. So digital twinning, creating a visual twin and an audio twin. And that's why we've invested so heavily in that technology in the last 12 months, particularly in audio, synthetic audio. Absolutely.
And is there, outside of what you mentioned about the AI and so forth, what other, from your perspective, what do you see some of the trends over the next 3 to 5 years that founders should be thinking about, or that investors should be thinking about capitalizing on?
Well, let's chop that into two. First of all, what can founders be thinking of? Look, there's no question for founders. It's getting more and more expensive to be heard, because what's happened is the millions of dollars that, let's just say in Australia, the millions of dollars that let's not take Australia. Let's take the UK. It's probably a better example because our lockdown has been much more severe than yours. But the millions of dollars that our department stores and shops used to spend driving customers into their stores, because the stores are closed, those millions of dollars have now found themselves being redeployed into the digital space, because now they've got to drive customers to their website. And so it's become very much more expensive for founders to be heard amongst that noise. So the first thing is the cost of influencer marketing has gone up substantially. That probably will settle down in time to come, but in the meantime, ridiculously expensive. So our view is, or my view certainly, is that the way around that will always be with technology. Technology is what leapfrogs you. And a good example of that would be somebody like, if you look at Tesla today is bigger than Toyota. Why is Tesla bigger than Toyota? It doesn't seem from a textbook perspective, it simply doesn't seem possible. The reason is because Tesla wasn't held back by old legacy business model. Wasn't held back by diesel engines and internal combustion petrol engines. It came to the table with a clean sheet of paper, and I think it's the same thing today, and that's why I'm so bullish about Crowd Media, because we're not held back by this legacy. We can use Elon Musk's GPT-3 AI platform, whereas some of the biggest players in our space can't, because they weren't built like that. So that's the first thing. In terms of sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit there. But in terms of what founders can do, number one, they've just got to be super agile and adapt with the technology. What can investors do? Well, investors are fairly limited, because you probably know that Crowd Media is the only listed company, certainly in Australia, possibly in the world. It's the only listed company to enable investors exposure into this particular space, and only this particular space. There are other companies that do aspects of what we're doing, but they don't have the same type of focus. And so I think if an investor has read the Deloitte report on conversational commerce, which is an amazing report to read, I'm sure that it's probably available on our website somewhere, and if it's not, by Monday I'll make sure that it is. But the Deloitte's conversational commerce, I think they actually call it AI conversation or something like that. But it's a must read. And we're one of the very few companies exposed to that, because that is the future. The future is you and I, this conversation, I hate to scare you, but this conversation in the future will take place I'll still be having breakfast downstairs and you'll be out partying with your friends, because this conversation will be able to take place entirely by chatbot, artificial intelligence, synthetic voices, and digital twinning. It'll look like you, it'll look like me, it'll sound like me, it'll sound like you. But the questions and answers will be coming from a database.
Well, I think that's I think that's a perfect topic that could be for another session at some time.
Absolutely. It's scary, but it's true. If you were to ask me, Stephen, where were you born? Or I was to ask you, where were you born? That answer doesn't have to come from our brain. It can come from someone else's brain. So then the only question is, well, how complicated is the question and how hard is it to answer? We'll be able to do this all virtually. That's the scary part.
Well, Stephen, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being a part of Emergence. If you want to find out some more information specifically about this area, obviously Crowd Mobile have a lot of information. Crowd Media, have a lot of information on their website. Their stock code is ASXCM8, which makes it easier to find in the search engine. Once again, Stephen, appreciate the insights and thank you again for your time.
Much appreciated. Thank you. It's nice talking to you.